Good morning, beautiful people. I hope you're having a wonderful day so far. Today, I want to talk about maximizing gains in a deficit, how we can grow as much muscle as possible while we're losing fat. It is definitely possible. First, let's get that out of the way. Some people still think that you can't build muscle in a deficit. That is objectively not true. First of all, we have literature proving that. Even in trained individuals, that's another thing, is people say you can only do it as a noob. Wrong. We have literature in trained individuals. We have a meta-analysis even. And also anecdotally, I've seen it. I know other coaches that have seen it. So we've got anecdotes and we've got literature proving you can build muscle in a deficit, even as a trained individual. So that's out of the way. How do you do it? How do you maximize the gains? Well, when we're thinking about maximizing gains in a deficit, when we're just thinking about muscle growth in general, you want to think about training is the spark and protein is the wood. So if it's a fire, right? So you can have as much wood as possible, but you're not going to light a fire. You're not going to grow any muscle if you don't have that spark. So the spark is the most important part. So training is the most important part of building muscle in a deficit. And even so there's the protein meta-analysis. There's a lean mass, it's protein in a deficit meta-analysis. And they looked at a shit ton of studies looking at lean mass losses or fat-free mass losses in calorie deficits. And they were looking at protein to find the optimal protein intake. And they found that protein intake was responsible for less than half of the variance in lean mass losses. They found that study design was more than half. So what that tells us is it's the training protocol that they're doing is really what is determining growth or loss in a deficit. So really your training is the most important variable. Obviously, we need protein. That's undeniable. And again, that study showed us that the more protein, the better. It was a straight up linear relationship. More protein people were eating during their calorie deficits, the less chance they had of losing lean mass, or the higher their lean mass retention. So we know that you need high protein. We know you need to be training hard and training smart. And then the other thing is we know that you need to not be in a crazy calorie deficit, not a super high one. So there's a different meta-analysis that looked at a whole bunch of different studies, and they found that basically right around that 500 calorie deficit, anything more than that was where we saw substantial losses in lean mass. But we have seen studies where people actually gained lean mass in 1,000 calorie deficits. So this is where the individual nuance comes in, right? This is where people get angry because I can't just give you a blanket prescription and say, yeah, anything less than 500 calories, you're probably going to lose muscle. That's not true. Depends on how long you've been in the gym, how much fat you have currently, how long the deficit is, right? Because you can do more aggressive deficits as long as you're just not in them for very long. And you can also do more aggressive deficits if you have more fat to lose, right? If you have a lot of energy on your body already, you don't really need to worry about your body tapping into protein stores, tapping into your muscle for energy. Your body doesn't like to do that. It doesn't like to use muscle for energy as long as you were training. Again, training is the most important part. So how are we going to structure our training? Well, ideally, it's just the classic principles. We're going to be hitting each muscle at least 2 times a week, maybe even 3. And we're going to be training close to failure, if not to failure, on most of our sets. And we're not going to be doing ridiculous amounts of volume. I like to count direct sets. So anywhere from 4 to, upwards of 10, 12 direct sets of a muscle per week is what I like to stick around. I honestly think most people will be good around that 4 to 6 range, but some people can really, really push the volume. And again, if you push the volume, you're probably going to have to decrease the frequency and or the intensity, right? Those are the 3 variables that move around in relation to each other. As we increase frequency, as we increase volume, we likely have to decrease the intensity. So, and vice versa, they all just interplay with each other to find your optimal range. And that's where hiring a coach comes in handy, because it's a lot easier to manage those 3 variables when someone else is doing it for you. But anyways, that's our training side of things. And with protein, we want to keep this fairly high, especially as natties. If you're enhanced, gear has some protein sparing qualities, so you can probably drop your protein a little bit lower. But as a natty, you should probably keep your protein minimum. I like to say, obviously we have studies that you can go lower. We have studies of people in a 40% calorie deficit, and they were only eating, I think, less than 0.8 grams per pound, and they actually maintained their muscle mass. I think they grew actually, but I think that was untrained individuals. So not necessarily what we're looking at here. So ideally, my recommendation for when you're in a deficit is to base your protein off of your fat-free mass. I like to just do that in general, as opposed to using your body weight, because of course, if we're in a deficit, our body weight is clearly not super indicative of our fat-free mass. If you want to guess your fat-free mass, you have to first know your body fat percentage, and then just look up an FFMI calculator online, type in your stats. It'll tell you how much fat-free mass you have. And you can base your protein off of that. And your protein, so it's going to be around, the floor is like 2.2 grams per kilogram of fat-free mass, which is a pretty high number. If you want to just stick around that 1 gram per pound of body weight, you're probably going to be good. And you can, again, push this a little bit higher. And we have seen benefits to pushing it a little bit higher. Like I said, in the meta-analysis, they just straight up found a linear relationship. So more protein is probably a good thing, especially we have the satiating effect of how much more full you are when you eat protein versus carbs it's overstated. I've looked into the literature, and when they switch out protein and carbs, typically people don't really feel a difference in their subjective hunger ratings. And then they also don't really change their intake. So I would say that the satiating effect of protein is overstated, but the thermic effect of food is not. It does take the most amount of calories to digest. Again, this is another thing where it's a small rock, because thermic effect of food is like 5% of your total calorie burn for the day. So we're talking small potatoes versus big potatoes, right? Pebbles versus boulders. But we do want to keep protein high, end of the day. And ideally, you're going to want to keep it higher. The higher your chance of lean mass loss, the higher you want to have your protein. So the more resistance trained you are, meaning the more years you have in the gym, the longer your deficit, the more aggressive your deficit, and your starting leanness. All of those are going to affect your risk of losing muscle in a deficit. So if you're already pretty lean, probably want to have higher protein. If you have been going to the gym for a while, probably want to have higher protein, because obviously you have more muscle mass. And then vice versa, right? If you have quite a bit of fat, you can probably keep your protein a little bit lower, because the chances of your body reaching into your muscle stores to take energy are pretty low, because you've got plenty of fat that it's going to take. So keep the protein high. 2.2 grams per kilogram of fat-free mass is a good starting point, and you can always go higher from there. And then when we're talking about fats, everyone likes to use that 0.3 grams per pound of body weight. But again, I'm not big on using body weight as an indicator when you're in a deficit, because of course you're trying to lose fat. So that's not going to be your fat requirements don't really change based on how much fat you have on your body. So I normally like to stick around 50 to 70 grams, depending on the person and their dietary preferences, right? Because some people just tend to like a higher fat diet, and the best diet is the one you can stick to at the end. So that's kind of where I sit on fats. And then the rest you're just going to fill with carbs. And I think one thing that's very important for maximizing gains in a deficit is intra-workout carbs. A lot of people, because again, training is the spark. Training is the most important variable when it comes to growing muscle, just in general, but especially when it comes to growing muscle in a deficit. And when you're in a deficit, that is the prime time of when your training suffers, especially towards the end. If you've ever done a bodybuilding prep, or if you've ever just gotten really lean before, you know that once you get really lean, once you're at the end of the deficit, your training suffers, and going to the gym sucks, and you don't even want to do it. Even if you are enhanced. I know a couple of bodybuilders that are enhanced, and I know one that's literally 3 weeks out for a show right now, and he is blasting. He's blasting, and he still feels like shit. He doesn't like going to the gym. It's his least favorite part of the day. And so, yeah, that just shows you how intense the deficit can get on your training. So you need those intra-workout carbs one is just the main effect, it seems, is that it keeps your blood sugar high, but it also has the effect of reducing your perception of effort. And the main hypothesis behind this is just that it's telling your brain that there is energy. You don't have to limit output, because energy is not limited. There's more on the way. And so I would say definitely use intra-workout carbs. 0.4 grams per kilogram of body weight is normally what I like to start with. Again, I don't like using body weight, but that's what the meta-analysis used. So that's where I kind of stick around. You can always go a little bit lower as well. Depends on your calorie intake. But if you're really on poverty calories, I mean, you could always just do carb swishing, where you don't even drink the calories. You just swish it through your mouth and spit it out right before your set. I've never had anyone do that. I don't think it's really that necessary. I mean, if you're at that point in your deficit where you can't even afford, like, because I'm a big dude, right? And I only have like 150 calories of intra-workout carbs. So you probably don't need that many calories. So, but definitely keep some intra-workout carbs. Intra-workout electrolytes are also probably a good idea, right? Because we are using calcium for every contraction. Same thing with like magnesium. And I don't know, electrolyte supplementation has gotten a lot of hate recently because fat people are doing it and people who don't really train that hard. And they're like, oh, you're just getting more sodium than you already need. And it's like, yeah, but drink water and you'll be good. Like literally that's what I have. I got my intra workout. I got some coconut water. I like doing coconut water. I mean, normally I'm a dextrose and electrolyte powder type of guy. It's a lot cheaper, it tastes better, but I ran out of dextrose and Ecolyte. Code Colt, save you some money. So yeah, we're doing coconut water because that's a great alternative because you've got sugar and electrolytes. You got calcium, potassium, and magnesium, and of course sodium. But yeah, intra workout. So if I just wanted to just kind of wrapping things up here. First of all, if you're getting anything out of this, drop a like, subscribe, really helps me out. I'd really appreciate it. But anyways, wrapping up here, main things is training. Don't train like a dumbass. Train each muscle group, ideally 2 times a week, sometimes 3, maybe 3, and train close to or to failure. Don't do ridiculous amounts of volume. Make sure you're getting adequate recovery, especially when you're in deficit. You really need to prioritize your recovery, and that covers training, right? With nutrition, protein, minimum 2.2 grams per kilogram of fat-free mass. In freedom units, I'm not exactly sure what that is per pound. You can do the math. And then fats, keep them pretty low as you can. Honestly, I think that the hormone health thing is overrated. I haven't seen just anecdotally, I haven't seen huge effects of dropping fats super low on hormones because your test is going to drop in deficit regardless. And it doesn't even look like it affects super low fat intake doesn't really affect females as much. That's in the literature and again, anecdotes. And so yeah, drop the fats super low, 0.3 grams per pound. If that 0.3 grams per pound lands you over 50 to 70 grams, I think you could probably drop it and be okay. Again, get your blood work done though, and that'll tell you more than I could. And then fill the rest of your day with carbs. We need to be keeping the carbs high to keep the energy high during this deficit. Intra-workout carbs, use them. 0.3 grams per pound, 0.4 grams per kilogram of body mass is a good starting point for intra-workout carbs. You can always do more, and intra-workout electrolytes as well. Because remember, end of the day, training is the most important part. That is what's going to keep it. So if your training sucks, you're going to lose muscle. You're not going to be able to gain muscle in your deficit. But that's all I've got for y'all. Peace out. Love you.